When looking at the Guadalcanal campaign that took place in late 1942 and early 1943, you're really looking at a three-dimensional battle. This first foray into the fight against the Axis powers on the ground was not just going to be taking place on the ground. This was going to be taking place at sea and in the air as well. Right now I'm on Guadalcanal, and behind me here you can see a stretch of water that is now known as Iron Bottom Sound. Right at the beginning of the Guadalcanal campaign, I don't know if you can see it, but back in the distance is Savo Island. There was going to be an epic naval battle that took place there that would result in one of the worst naval defeats in U.S. military history. And all throughout the Guadalcanal campaign, there was fighting that was taking place out here on the ocean. So when people come to Guadalcanal, they think of standing on land as being on the battlefield, but the ocean is actually part of the battlefield as well. And there are still just dozens and dozens of ships at the bottom of the ocean still there today. So we're getting ready to hop in a boat. We're actually going to go out on the battlefield. We're going to cross Iron Bottom Sound, and we're going to go to Tulagi, where the U.S. Marine Raiders would first make their landing on August 7th. Oh my dear heavens, we are fixing to cross Iron Bottom Sound in a John boat. Holy cow. All right, we just landed here at Tulagi, and holy smokes, it is hot here. It is really, really hot, which is why I'm wearing this real lightweight long sleeve shirt from Origin, basically to keep my white skin from getting just completely scorched today. But anyway, Tulagi and Gavutu and Tanabogo, these in the original Allied plans were kind of the main focus of attack. There was a big Japanese seaplane base that was right here. It wasn't until the building of Henderson Field was discovered that things kind of shifted a little bit more towards Guadalcanal. But placed in charge of taking the island of Tulagi was going to be the 1st Marine Raider Battalion under the leadership of Lieutenant Colonel Edson. Now, they didn't land right here. They actually landed a little bit further to the west at a place called Blue Beach. So we're going to go over there right now and talk about some of the issues that they had at Blue Beach. All right, we have made our way over to Blue Beach, and holy smokes, I am so excited to be here. This is amazing. I can't believe that I'm here right now. Now, the spot where we landed was close to an area called the Government Wharf. Japanese forces were pretty much concentrated to the eastern end of the island. Well, when the Allies were planning the invasion of Tulagi, General Vandergrift, who was the commander of the 1st Marine Division, said he wanted to land his men where the Japanese weren't. And that is why the 1st Marine Raider Battalion landed right here at Blue Beach. Again, never in my wildest dreams did I ever think that I would be able to make it to a place like Tulagi. I mean, this is absolutely incredible. Now, again, this is where the Raiders landed, but there were actually some Marines who were just ahead of them. If you'll notice, we're kind of in a little bit of a bay here, and there was concern that the Japanese could have some gun emplacements there that could provide flanking fire to the Raiders who were coming in on Blue Beach. So, if you look in the distance there, you'll notice that island-looking thing right in front of me. Well, just this side of it and to the right, so around the bend from this part of the island, this is Florida Island, there's a little bay, and inside that bay was a little village called Haleta. Well, at about 7:40 in the morning, B Company of the 1st Battalion of the 2nd Marines landed there to basically make sure that there were no Japanese who would be hitting the Marines from the flank. And those men would be the very first Americans to step foot on Axis territory in World War II. So before Normandy, before Italy, before Sicily and North Africa, right here is where the advance against the Axis powers began. Now, the Marine Raiders would be coming in at about 8 o'clock. And there were some issues with their landing. There were some coral that was out here that their boats got hung up on, and they ended up having to jump out and wade ashore. They were followed by the 2nd Battalion of the 5th Marines, and they landed unopposed right here on Blue Beach.
All right, so the 1st Raider Battalion that landed here on Blue Beach at 8 o'clock on the 7th of August originally formed from the 1st Battalion, 5th Marines in 1941. So the U.S. Marines under Holcomb, who was the commandant, had decided, let's do a raiding force, right? And this was before the war, so it's 1941 for the Americans. At the time, you had Edson, Colonel Mike Edson. He was the battalion commander of 1st Battalion, 5th Marines. So he was tasked of forming a special battalion. So he formed a special battalion. And these special battalion, they trained them up in mainly rubber boat landings. They converted some 4-stacker destroyers. They took 2 stacks destroyers off to create more room, so they could put a 150-man, or I think about 100-man raider company in each one to do fast raids. So he was training to do that. And then the war came. Franklin Roosevelt said he'd seen what the British were doing with their commandos. So he asked, long story short, he says, I want some commandos and myself, the Raiders. So the commandant was tasked of forming 2 battalions of Raiders. So the 1st Special Battalion became the 1st Raider Battalion under Colonel Edson. So he started training these guys in the more small raiding tactics and just really improving on what they're already done. They started getting some good equipment, getting a pick of some good officers. And at the same time, they formed the 2nd Raider Battalion under Evans Carlson. And just a side note, the battalion commander was Evans Carlson, who was a good, I wouldn't say friend, but he's an accomplice of FDR. But his son, James Roosevelt, was executive officer. So you can imagine they got all the best equipment and gear. So he had 2 Raider battalions. Very unique way each battalion commander ran the unit. So basically how the unit was ran reflected upon their battalion commander. So the 1st Raider Battalion was more orthodox, while the 2nd Raider Battalion is more unorthodox. So that's a story amongst itself. So their main goal was to do amphibious raids, amphibious reconnaissance, tasks such as that. Now the reason they were picked to be the lead here on Tulagi because the division anticipated this to be the toughest fight. So what Vandergrift did, he used his best battalions at the same time to take this island. So he used the 1st Parachute Battalion to take Gavutu and Tanambogo, the 1st Raider Battalion to take Tulagi, and the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, was to follow in. Now the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines was a well-trained unit under Lieutenant Colonel Rosecrans. And they knew the guys from 1-5 because the 1st Raiders used to be 1st Battalion, 5th Marines. So, and that was the reason they were picked for this. Now in the Tazamboco raid, they actually got to do what they were designed to do amphibious raids. But the 2nd Raider Battalion got to do more the raids and the commando and guerrilla operations they were trained to do. But I think the 1st Raiders on Guadalcanal, they were mainly used as shock force, or shock troops, I guess you could say.
Here at Blue Beach, they have a memorial to the U.S. Marine 1st Raider Battalion and the 2nd Battalion of the 5th Marines who landed here on August 7th. Now, after the Marines landed here, well, they moved inland, and the Raiders were going to cross right here, and then four companies of Raiders were going to split off to the right, and they were going to start making their way down this part of the island. The 2nd Battalion of the 5th Marines were going to hook off to the left, and they were going to go and clear the left part of the island. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and move along kind of in the path of the Marine Raiders. One thing that I do want to note, you have probably heard some children in the background. Well, this is a school that was founded and funded by the U.S. Marine Raider Association. So this place meant a lot to them. It's where they went into action for the first time in combat, and then came back and funded a school for the children here in Tulagi. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Okay, the first real encounter that the Marines, the Raiders, when they came through, probably about midday on the 7th of August. Now, one company on the other side of the island encountered some sniper fire from the China quarters, where the scene is where the Chinese lived pre-war. A few bits of sniper fire, maybe one machine gun burst, but it was very light. C Company under Major Ken Bailey, they came through this area, and this is Hill 208 here. So pre-war, in this little, I guess, alcove here, or draw if you want to call it, was where the police barracks, the Solomon Island police barracks were. It was located in here. The police superintendent's house was on top of the hill. It was a nice colonial style house sitting on top of the hill. So when the Japanese, their defenses were set out, they didn't expect anyone to come from this way. So everything was coming basically from the southeast.
Good afternoon.
Morning, morning.
Morning.
So they expect everyone to come from the southeast. So their positions was on the other side of this hill. So it wasn't reverse slope defenses like we've seen, that we'll see later in the Guadalcanal campaigns for specific purposes. It just happened, they expected the danger to come from that area. Anyway, so C Company in the morning, they passed through the 1st platoon, they went around the corner there, and the Japanese waited. Obviously they were watching them. They waited till the 1st platoon cleared them. Then they opened fire on the Marines. So they had two platoons here, another platoon around the corner. So they quickly, this was the first time that actually this company or the Raiders were under fire. So they reacted very quickly. They tried to gain fire superiority. They started throwing some support on the Japanese. So Major Ken Bailey basically went, you can see these ridges, this is straight up. So him and a squad of guys went around this way and flanked it and came down on top of the Japanese. So he was on top of the Japanese with a number of them. They're firing in it, trying to stop the Japanese fire. Ken Bailey actually lifts a couple of the sandbags off. It took him a while to work out how to get the Japanese out. So he lifted a few sandbags out. I threw a couple of grenades. It didn't work. So at that stage, Ken Bailey was shot in the thigh, and he returned fire. At one stage, I haven't confirmed this, but apparently he grabbed the Arisaka Japanese rifle and was returning fire, and they quickly took out the Japanese machine gun. But Bailey was shot in the leg, kept firing, and he's something like 6'3". The Bailey was evacuated. So this was the first resistance hill 208 in the campaign, really, you could actually say, of Guadalcanal, because the guys at Tannenbogo hadn't hit yet.
We have moved to the eastern part of the island now, and on the first day, the Marine Raiders would have advanced east on Tulagi, 4 companies abreast, until they got, it's kind of back over in this direction, where they ended up on the first evening. And right here, well, this is Hill 281, which again is on the eastern part of the island, and all up in here, well, the Japanese were all holed up in caves, and this was going to be a little bit of a tough nut to crack for the Marines. They ended up launching like 6 offensives across this ground right here. This is an area that was called the cricket pitch. There was a cricket field that was right here. So you can just imagine these poor Marines launching 6 attacks up on this high ground in this jungle. Now the men who were up here were under the command of a man named Suzuki Masaki. These were guys from the Special Naval Landing Force for the Japanese, and probably looking at about 900 soldiers who were up here on top of this hill. So the next day, on the 8th, the Marines were going to have their hands full trying to clear this hill. Here's a story that Dave just told me that is pretty wild. We're standing on an area of the island that is known as the Cut. This was carved out in 1918, 1920, somewhere around there, to make travel between different points in the island a little bit quicker. And right here, it's all filled in now, but there was a bit of a cave that was right here. And the Japanese had fortified it, had put sandbags up around it, and were defending this area. So when the Marines came, well, they were on either side of this cut, and they ended up kind of shooting each other. So they were trying to figure out how to get these guys out. Well, what they ended up doing is they went and got a 50-gallon drum, got up above this thing, and poured fuel down into the cave, and then lit it up. And as the Japanese came pouring out of this hole, well, they would be fired upon by the Marines. So anyway, there's probably still some Japanese remains just buried in the side of this hill. All right, I've moved over just a bit, just to kind of orient you as to where we are. Here's Hill 281 again. The spot where I was just at is down there, so I've moved back over here. And the American lines at the end of the first day would have ran right up this hill and would have been right here in front of us. Now, we are at an area that is known as the Cut. So this is where the American forces stopped at the end of day 1. You would have had the 2nd Battalion of the 5th Marines that would have circled around kind of behind us. And then on the 8th, well, they would have advanced right up this hill to make the final assault on the Japanese. Basically surrounded them, started pounding them with 81mm mortars, and then just kind of working their way in. All right, we are making our way up Hill 281 here, and coming up these hills gives you an all-new appreciation for what these Marines went through. I mean, it is insanely hot, and it doesn't take much to get you gassed. But right here in this spot, you can see where there's a pretty steep drop-off. Well, just below us is where the caves were that the Japanese were holed up into and firing on the Marines that were advancing on this position. Well, once the Marines got behind them and got up in this area, they were basically taking satchel charges and things like that and flinging them over the edge, not to really blow up the Japanese, more to try and just blow up the caves and trap them inside. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and move on up the hill now. All right, we just made it to the top of Hill 281 here, and they have a little memorial here. You can see this Japanese gun emplacement that was here on top of the hill. But the Marine Raiders and the 2nd Battalion of the 5th Regiment would have made it up here on August 8th. Only took 3 Japanese prisoners. So that was kind of a foreshadowing of things to come in the Pacific Campaign. The Japanese were going to fight to the death almost every island that the U.S. Army and Marines and Navy were going to be assaulting. And I'll tell you what, like I said down there earlier, have an all-new appreciation for these guys. This is some brutal conditions to fight in. But there were a couple of other islands here in this area that were attacked on the morning of August 7th, called Gavutu and Tanambogo, and we're going to be heading there right now. But that was a little bit on the story of the Marine Raiders right here on Tulagi.